Her greatest strength is also her biggest weakness.
Alright guys, as you can see, we got another video on transgender athletes today, and I've already explained in a previous video why I don't think this is fair from a competitive standpoint, and if you'd like to see my reasoning for that, you can check out that video. But for this video, I just want to go through a recent story on the transgender athlete you just saw, Hannah Mouncey, and I'll add a couple thoughts here and there and then just kick it back to you guys and see what y'all think about it. Okay, so this story was actually reported last week in the Daily Wire by Amanda Prestigiacomo, and I'll just read some of the main points. Standing at 6'2" and weighing in at 220 pounds, male to female transgender handballer Hannah Mouncey is dominating at the Women's Asian Championships in Japan. Before his transition to female in May 2016, Mouncey played for the Australian men's handball team. According to Handball's Connellan, Mouncey scored 4 goals in a match against Kazakhstan on Friday and contributed a combined 8 goals in matches against Japan and Iran. So basically guys, he's been playing really well, as you might imagine. Due to Mouncey's weight, height, and testosterone levels, he was barred from entering the Australian Football League women's draft last year. He also wrote a piece for The Guardian in September blasting the AFL for their regulations. He noted specifically that the weight regulation is a form of body shaming and a blow to all women, transgender or not. He said that, "My biggest concern is the fact that weight is being used as one of the key physical measures for possible exclusion. Forget the fact that in a game that has such an emphasis on endurance and speed, being heavy is not necessarily an advantage, and think about the message it sends to women and girls about their bodies. If you're too big, you can't play. That is incredibly dangerous and backward." Alright, so I can sort of get Hannah's argument here. He's basically saying that size and strength don't necessarily have the same advantage in handball that they have in other sports, like wrestling or football for example, but my response to that is, if we start to pick and choose which sports transgender athletes can compete in based on their perceived level of birth gender advantage, I think that'll just end up being even more discriminatory and complicated than not allowing it at all. Because you guys know this, once you give up ground in a couple sports, the movement is not going to end there, right? They'll just keep encroaching on more and more sports. And let's also be real here. Hannah is 6'2", 220 pounds, and so testosterone or not, he's still a force to be reckoned with, even in handball. He's still got the head-to-head physical advantage over at least 95% of women on the planet. And just to hammer in this point, think about a sport like basketball, and let's use an extreme example. If a biological male with LeBron's physique were to undergo transition and do all of the required hormonal treatments, does anyone really believe that that would make a meaningful difference in leveling the playing field? I mean, obviously he'd lose some muscle strength, but he would still run a train through the entire WNBA without a doubt. Whichever team drafts female LeBron would be the odds-on favorite to win the title every single year, and he'd be the MVP every single year. That's just the common sense truth, right? That's why nobody is really concerned about biological females transitioning to males and trying to compete at a high level against other biological males. You know, they just wouldn't get drafted. It's only when biological men want to transition to women and compete against biological women that we have this debate. There's a reason for that. Anyway, guys, I want to make clear that this is not an attack on Hannah. Trust me, I've seen a lot of footage on Hannah, and I'll show you some of those clips from his 60 Minutes interview last year in a moment, but from everything I've seen so far, he's a really nice person, and he's just been going through something that we don't fully understand yet from a neurobiological and psychological perspective. But it's precisely because of our lack of understanding here that I think it's very premature for society to start changing established rules for sporting events, for bathroom regulations, and of course for compelled speech with respect to preferred pronouns. I think the wise thing to do here is to have some restraint and do more research before changing up public policies. Anyway, here's some clips from the interview I mentioned so you can see things from Hannah's perspective.
We've got one here that says, "How is the decision unacceptable? It's a bloke in a dress."
Look, if that's what he thinks, I don't really care.
There is a chorus of opinion that believes that you've made this change because it's easier to be an elite athlete.
No one would, in their right mind, would do that. But look, when I transitioned, I thought I knew, but I had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into, absolutely none. You know, I lost pretty much all my friends. Bloody hard to get a job, and it's really difficult to find somewhere to live.
Were you more attracted to females or males at that
point?
point?
Yeah, girls for sure, and still am. You know, and that's something people don't really understand, is gender identity and, you know, sexuality, they're completely different. You know, it's difficult. You know, it's even been to the point where I've gone, look, if I could just make this better for everyone else and have all my friends back, would I just go back to me and Callum? And the thing is, you know, I just can't. You know, it's something, I know that if I was to do that, I'd become just as miserable as I was before. It's not a choice. You know, it just isn't. No one would choose that. You know, I just sort of want to be able to be happy, you know, that's pretty much it.
Like everybody else.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Alright, I've linked the full interview below if you're interested, but as you can see, this hasn't been easy on Hannah, right? And I honestly don't think his decision to transition had anything to do with trying to compete against easier competition. I don't believe that's what motivated him. Like I said earlier, I think he's been dealing with some complex neuropsychosocial issues, and if he thinks that transitioning was the right decision for him and is going to be a net positive on his life, you know, he's an adult. It's none of my business. I don't really care. I only care when parents try to transition their children, which I think should be prohibited everywhere, and I also do care about fair competition in sports. I mean, obviously sports are not perfectly fair. Some athletes are born with more natural potential than others, but there's a reason that every society has restricted the dynamic range of competition into male and female categories. And I don't have a daughter, but if I do someday, I wouldn't be very happy to see her lining up against a transgender girl like Hannah, who has all of these clear physical advantages over her. It's like having pro athletes play against college athletes, or varsity versus JV. There's just too much of an advantage there for it to be reasonably fair competition. Anyway, that's my opinion, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. And in closing, I just want to make something clear. You'll have noticed that I used male pronouns when referring to Hannah in this video, and it's not because of any ill will, it's simply because science has not reached a consensus on what transgenderism really is at the level of the brain and how social and environmental factors can influence a person's desire to reject their biological sex. And until we have more understanding, I don't want to be forced to use language that contradicts apparent reality. On a one-on-one basis, I would probably use someone's preferred pronoun just to be nice, and even in our last video on this topic, I did use the transgender athlete's preferred pronoun, so it was clear that my views weren't coming from a place of hate. And to the best of my knowledge, YouTube has not mandated any compelled speech policy requiring creators to use preferred pronouns. So I don't believe I'm violating any terms of service here, but then again, neither did Sargon when he got kicked off of Patreon a few days ago, so I guess you never really know these days what's acceptable and what's not on various media platforms. While I'm on this subject, some of you have been asking if we're going to switch to another crowdfunding platform in light of this whole Sargon episode, and to be honest, we haven't really had time to discuss it properly and explore other options, but we definitely are going to do that, and in the meantime, we do appreciate your continued support. For sure, I do not feel safe on Patreon anymore